Entirely your fault. So, we spent some time talking about how we are to honor our parents, and our mother in particular, last week. And I hope that was good reminder for you. It was for me. But today we're back in John chapter 4. John chapter 4. We're going to start about verse 15. And we're picking this series up. We are in the middle of the record of what most people know as the Samaritan woman, or the woman at the well. She's a Samaritan woman. She is at a patriarchal well that was dug, in fact, by Jacob, by Israel. She came by herself, if you remember. That was not normal. This was something of a communal affair at an odd time of day, with the sun beating down on us. We understand what that's like, right? Going outside and going, what is going on here? We're frying like bacon out here. That's not when you choose to mow your yard normally, right? That's not when you choose to do the work in the middle of the day. Jesus asked her for a drink, which would not have been necessarily out of order, except it shocked her. It was unusual, remember, to find a Jewish man in Samaria at all. They would only pass through under the most dire of circumstances. But this Jewish man, who may or may not have been recognizable as a rabbi, a teacher, speaking to a Samaritan woman under any circumstance in Samaria at this well. And he asked her for a drink. As you read this text, you realize it never says that she gave him one. The man just wanted a drink of water. Never says that she gave one. She engaged him in conversation. This is kind of an odd duck situation. Maybe she did. It's not explicitly stated in the text. But verse 15 says, the woman said to him, or we're in mid-conversation. Jesus has had the last word in verse 14. Verse 15 says this, the woman said to him, Sir, give me this water. Remember, he said, if you knew who I was, you would ask me, and I would give to you a living water and you will thirst no more, and it'll spring up inside of you. Self-propagating. And she says, Sir, give me some of this water, so I will not be thirsty, nor will I come all the way here to draw. And he said to her, Go, call your husband, and come here. Now, this is an interesting response. Jesus has tried to explain to her a couple of times about the water. And she is still in H2O land, and Jesus is still in spiritual land, and she hasn't connected the dots yet. Doesn't get it. They are sitting outside of a well that had actual H2O in it, so that may be understandable a little bit. I told you the story about my friend who sells water better than God can make last week, right? I think he's still selling it. He doesn't say that. But he says the water that we get, if you order water at the restaurant, you don't carry around a little black jug so that it doesn't get too much sun on it, that our water isn't wet enough for him anymore. I kind of wonder if she didn't look at Jesus like that. Are you offering me water that's better than what's in here? She still has her task in mind, getting water from the ground into her vessel and then into her body. This is a major time savings for her, not being thirsty, not having to draw water, not having to carry it by hand. But Jesus does not take a third approach with the concept of the living water. In fact, he seems a little bit unwilling to take another approach at all directly here to me with this Samaritan woman. She's asked him, give me some of this water so I won't be thirsty. I won't be dehydrated. Jesus' response at that point is, go and call your husband and come here. Now, there's a lot of explanations about this, about why Jesus did this. Most come down to little more than Jesus is about ready to put on a show. He's about ready to show off a little bit. He's about to pull out one of those messianic miracle things out of his pocket, which he is. That's valid. He's about to demonstrate a supernatural knowledge, a power that he has, and that's true. But we all need to understand something, and if you're if you're of a politically correct orientation, you may not like what I'm about to give you here. I can't tell from the outside if y'all are politically correct type people. But you're here with my gun strapped to my hip, so I figure you're a little less politically correct oriented than some people. You might not like it that much. It might hurt your feelings a little bit, but the expectation in Scripture, pretty much from beginning to end, from beginning to end of Scripture, is that if a wife did not understand something, it was improper. It was a breach of propriety, a protocol for somebody unrelated to her to have a long, drawn-out public argument and explanation, especially about spiritual matters. The expectation throughout Scripture was that she would then ask her husband, and her husband would explain this to her and would lead her in this area. That if something about spiritual matters or the Scripture needed to be explained, that the husband would explain it. Certainly an expectation within Jewish culture, again, a recognition of what Jesus assumed about the Samaritans, that they were actually part of the lost sheep of the house of Israel. You know, Paul had the same expectation for those inside the church. He said in 1 Corinthians 14, if any woman wants to learn something, let her ask her husband. I told you it wasn't politically correct. I told you. I don't care. Folks, it's still an expectation. Men, young men who don't have this situation yet, it's still an expectation. Husbands are supposed to take this role in regards to spiritual things. You're supposed to answer spiritual questions that your wife and your family have about spiritual things. Now listen, men, if your wife just snorted a little, or maybe you could imagine your wife snorting a little, as Pastor says that. Maybe a little snicker under her breath. Yeah, she may have an attitude problem. I don't know, but more than likely, men, we have work to do. More than likely, we have work to do. Most of the time. Because if that's the normal, natural response, then that means that's not the expectation within your relationship there. You know, and this makes people upset because then, well, Pastor, that means I have to know things. You know how unpopular knowing things anymore is? That means I have to learn things. I have to study things. I have to have a little bit more vocabulary than I used to have. I can't just talk about beer, football, and Cheetos. No, you can't. I can't. I don't talk about beer, football, and Cheetos very much. Don't really like beer. Well, I like beer. I don't like football. I don't like most beer that people drink while they're watching football. I'm a little bit more German than that. And Cheetos. We should all be asking questions about Cheetos. You know. But we got to move beyond that. You know, in other words, we have to be going somewhere in order to lead. We have to know things in order to explain them. We have to understand things in order to answer questions. And men, you ought to be able to do this. You need to be able to do this. And the answers are there. The answers are here. They are here. You just have to do the work. And if you don't know how, that's okay. I can help you if you need help. There are men in this church that can help you if you need help. And I promise you that we will. But guys, there's no coasting allowed. So there's a problem with that dynamic. That's the expectation. That's what the rabbi expects. Go call your husband, come here, and we'll talk some more. There's a problem. You probably remember what that problem is, do you? Everybody knows this story. There's a problem with that dynamic here. The woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, you have correctly said, I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one whom you have now is not your husband. This you have said truly. So the normal dynamic doesn't apply. Trying to relate this story to somebody in that day, I mean, that's edging into hypothetical la-la land. Like, how is, you have, how many? It was similar to the preposterous situation. You remember when the Sadducees came to Jesus, and the gospel writer explains to us, the Sadducees who believed there is no resurrection thought they had Jesus. And they said, what about this? What about this woman who's widowed 7 times, and she has levirate marriage with 7 brothers? Whose wife is she in the eternity, in the resurrection, in the resurrection? It was just like, so hypothetical, nobody would even bother to think about it except the Sadducees. This was actual. I mean, we don't sit there in our day with our jaws dropped as much as they would have back then about this. It was jaw-dropping then. It might be today, because a lot of people, after 1 or 2 runs at it, often, they just don't get married anymore. She knew it. It was probably shocking to her. Not just because Jesus knew it, but you know how it is when somebody actually says something to you. You know it to be true, but when you go, well, when you say it like that, it's shocking. Because you said it out loud. You said it to my face. Aside from the fact that Jesus shouldn't know that. It's confrontation. Felt like a smack in the face. He had no natural way of knowing that. She's a thinker, though. She don't want to go down that road any further. She wants to change the subject. Understandable. That's enough about me, Jesus. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about you. The woman said to him, Sir, I observe, or I understand, I perceive that you are a prophet. A prophet. Of course, he was a prophet. Y'all know that Jesus, as part of his ministry, took on all of the anointed offices: prophet, priest, king. It's not that hard to observe. You'd be like, no kidding, Sherlock, he's a prophet. She really, really wants to change the topic, so she does. One of the major rifts between the Samaritans and I'll call them the Judeans. That's what John refers to them as. Regionally, the Samaritans and the Judeans is this thing that she's about to bring up. She wants to talk about something less personally volatile. She wants to change the subject to religion and politics from her personal life. That tells you how volatile her personal life was. She wants to talk politics now between the Samaritans and the Judeans. Our father, she says, worshipped in this mountain. That was Mount Gerizim. And y'all, that's what it literally said. Y'all laughing. I can show you this. Y'all say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Yes. The Samaritans did worship at Mount Gerizim. They worshiped Yahweh there. And this is where John said, and the Judeans did say, correctly, I might add, that Jerusalem was the place where worship to Yahweh was to take place. Jesus did not introduce a question about who was getting worshipped, however. They were worshiping Yahweh there. Their ancestors, and this is where you need to know a little bit of history, their fathers, their ancestors, started worshiping at Mount Gerizim when there was nowhere to worship in Jerusalem. This was when virtually the entire nation was taken out in exile for idolatry. And various and sundry things that accompanied idolatry. They were taken out of the land. The Samaritans were descended from the people who missed that exile and intermarried with people there. They started worshiping there when most of Israel was maybe not even praying in Babylon. And this was the major rift between the Samaritans and the Judeans. Sounds a little bit like sour grapes to me, actually. Why did they get to stay in the land? Why did they get to choose to worship in the land of their ancestors? You know, it's like today, pretty much no one can literally follow the Torah when it comes to worshiping Yahweh. They can't go to the temple. Anybody know why? There's a big, huge mosque there. So what did they do? When they could no longer get to the temple, they said, oh, well, reading the Torah, that's sacrifice. Don't we say kind of the same thing? When I tell you, you got to read the Bible, you go, Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. I mean, it may be sacrificial, but it's not blood sacrifice, people. Not really. No Bible's ever attacked you like that. So they had to get a little liberal, not surprisingly. They had to fudge a little bit and say that reading the Torah was sacrifice. So the Samaritans weren't the only ones that were capable of just bending the rules a little bit, rationalizing things. But this was the major conflict that they had. I mean, this was like their very own worship wars before we had drums and guitar. They had their own worship war going on. And Jesus said to her, woman, I want to say that again. Woman! Just because I can. Believe me, a time is coming or an hour is coming when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know. For salvation is from the Judeans. Did you say Jews there? Judeans is a little better in this context. The answer is coming. There is an answer. There is an objective answer to this question. There is a right and wrong. Jesus wants to clarify with her, though, first. Yes, there's an answer, but before I give you the answer, I want you to recognize that this is a temporary answer. He needs her to realize that not every problem, not every faction, not every division or resolution, not everything matters forever. And that's something that we ought to keep in mind in the church. Most of the problems we spend most of the time on are temporary. And the resolution is temporary and of temporary significance. Most of the things don't matter forever. We spend a lot of time on things that are less important. This is one of those. He says, there is a time, he says, in which the answer to your question will not matter any longer. It will not matter what mountain you go to, where you sacrifice to Yahweh, where you go to worship the Father. It will not matter in the slightest where you go for that. And he says the objective, actual answer in that time and in that place is that salvation is from the Judeans. Most translations have the word Jew there. But I don't think that Jesus is referring to the Samaritans in this context as a Gentile separate nation in a derogatory way. He's not even treating them as Gentile converts here in the way he's talking. For all intents and purposes, Jesus, and we'll see this some more, Jesus is treating them as if they possess the covenants made with Israel. Regionally, he's saying salvation is from the Judeans. Why is that? Well, you can see it in the word. Where do we get the word Judean from? Judah. Who's the Messiah? The Lion of the tribe of Judah. Descended from David, who was of the tribe of Judah. Jesus' tribe. And it was to David, the ancestor of Jesus himself, humanly speaking, that the location of the temple was revealed. He got all the stuff together, and another Judean, his son, built the thing on the mount. That was right. That was true. That was correct. But this is one issue that wouldn't matter forever. It says, but an hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people, the Father seeks to be his worshipers. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. He says, this is how it's going to be. This is coming, and now is. The time is coming, and it now is, because I'm standing here in front of you, Samaritan woman, Jesus says. Time is coming, and now is, when we will get past this, when true worshipers will not worry about mountains. They won't care about mountains. True worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. He says that time is coming, meaning that it is perpetually coming, always into the future. This is the permanent resolution. This is the permanent status of affairs, and here it is now. It's already started. It's coming, and now is. And you'll find all sorts of commentaries written about what it means to worship in spirit and in truth. Lots of law. Lots of law in those lists. In the spirit column, the truth column, the behave column. And at the bottom, there's usually a big long formula about how you become a believer. No, Jesus didn't use that word, did he? Did he? You saw the word true, right? Did you see believer after that? See, they all laugh at me when I say true believer. It doesn't really show up in Scripture. True worshiper. True worshiper shows up here. Lots of lists, lots of extra biblical assumptions. Most of it isn't really reliable. Understand, this is not about you. Not about the Samaritan woman. It wasn't about the condition that she was in. He says you have to worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Because that's the true, actual revelation of the Father's Spirit. God is Spirit, he said. Jesus says that God is pneuma, actually, if you want to pronounce the pi, the P. That's what he is. It's who he is. It's how he is. It's how he relates. Let me ask you something. Who's the one in this context who has God's Spirit? Anybody in Samaria have God's Spirit yet? Anybody in Judea have God's Spirit yet? Other than Jesus of Nazareth. Let me ask you this. Who was conceived by God's Spirit? Jesus. Indwelt by God's Spirit? Jesus. Filled by God's Spirit, as far as we know to this point in John chapter 4, Jesus alone. Truly Jesus. Who was the one that could say that if you have seen me, you have seen the Father? I told you it wasn't a trick question, guys. Who was the one of whom it was said, he is the exact representation of the Father's likeness? Jesus. Jesus is not telling her how she has to be to come to God. He's telling her how God had to be to come to man. In spirit and truth. Jesus is telling her how God came to man, not how she has to come to God. It won't be about the mountains. It'll be about the Messiah. It's no longer mountain truth. That was temporary. It was about to pass away. It's Messiah truth. Jesus truth. It's spirit and truth. And it is remarkable because she didn't get that living water business at all, did she? 2 or 3 runs at it. She didn't get the living water thing. For all of her confusion about the water, she understands that this is Messiah truth. She knows about the Messiah. She considers the promise of the Messiah to be hers. And so does Jesus. Sounds a little Jewishy, doesn't it? The woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming. I know that Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. And when that one comes, he will declare or announce all things to us. I know he's coming. And he's coming to us. Who's the us? Samaritans. Steve doesn't believe me. That's okay. He's coming to us. When he comes to us, he's going to tell us the whole thing. What did John tell us at the very beginning of this section about Jesus? It says Jesus heard that the Pharisees knew, I'm paraphrasing, that he was baptizing more people than John was. And he went back to Galilee, and he had to go through Samaria. It's part of his purpose. The anointed one, the Christ. And this woman knows when that Messiah comes, he will straighten out all the crooked spots. He will make it all clear. He will declare everything to us in spirit and truth. And he will announce what is good and right and proper, all things. All things. And not every translation of Jesus' response does a good job of honoring the word order in this last verse we're going to look at. You know that in Greek, word order is not as important as it is in English. It's like the hill you must die on in English in a lot of ways. In Greek, it's not that important, but sometimes it's significant. I'm going to read it to you with the actual word order intact. Jesus said to her, I am the one speaking to you. I am. Ego eimi. Jesus used a covenant title with her, one that was given to the Jewish people. Most scholars recognize that Jesus does this quite a lot in John. In fact, they think they've got the magic number. You know what the magic number is? 7. When scholars find 7 of something, they think that they are just short of being Paul the Apostle. Like they have got it figured out. If they find 7, a group of 7 of something, a light starts shining in their office. In John 6, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. In John 8, he says, I am the light of the world. John 10, I am the door. And also, I am the good shepherd. John 11, I am the resurrection and the life. John 14, I am the way, the truth, the life. John 15, I am the true vine. See, I don't get a light over my head for this one because I'm messing up the system. There's at least 8 times where Jesus claims Yahweh's covenant title. I don't mean to mess them up. Their system preaches well. The Bible messes up a lot of good sermons. It really does. We say that in seminary a lot. I would add a reference to that list. Here he says, I am. I'm the Messiah. I'm the one that you know is coming. I am the one speaking to you. I am. I am the Messiah. Spirit and truth. God is spirit. And I have his spirit, and I am a true representation of him. I am the Messiah. And if you would truly worship him, you do that through me. That's not temporary. That was the time that now is and is coming forever. That's what Jesus said. It's the final stage of things. That covenant name that God gave a covenant people. He revealed it to them that they would know who it was that was sending them into this land, right? You remember that? Who shall I say? Very significant. I am that I am. It was revealed so that they would know how to respond to him. we'll see how she responds next week.